Hi, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You're listening to Living the Wildlife, discussing all things related to vertebrate pest control as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. If you're wondering what this podcast is all about, we're all about providing research-based information, technical information to help you resolve conflicts with vertebrate pests. So if that's something you're interested, this is the show for you. Hope you had a great week. I've certainly been busy, of course, still, but things are I'm starting to see a little bit more daylight down the road. Like I said last time, some of my obligations have been reduced, and so I am looking forward to being able to delve into some of the other areas that remain a little bit more deeply. So if you're looking to reach out to me, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you, thoughts about new shows. Perhaps you have a topic that's really puzzling you. You'd like to see if I would comment on it. Or if you have a product or something you want to talk about, you can definitely reach out and be a guest on our show. We love having guests here on Living the Wildlife because I think there's not enough information being transferred within our industry, that we have communication blocks, and I hope that my show is able to help reduce some of those blocks. This week, I thought I would talk a little about black bears. And so typically black bears and other animals that are highly regulated by state wildlife agencies is not something that we typically talk about on Living the Wildlife podcast. Why? Because, well, the state agencies really haven't given a lot of opportunities for those of us in the wildlife control world to participate in the management of those animals. Those are typically restricted to government personnel, whether it's federal or whether it is state, not the private sector, which is typically what happens in the vertebrate pest world, is typically private. But nevertheless, bears are becoming an issue, particularly as we try to of course, let their populations mature. And of course, black bears have really reestablished almost their entire historical range in the United States. If not, it's well on its way from its past, from the 1800s. But also that we have more and more people hiking in woods, and this is becoming an issue in terms of how do we prevent black bear attacks. Now, I want to be clear about this. I'm not speaking about grizzly bears. That's going to be a future topic. But the next couple of podcasts are going to cover black bear attacks and how do we mitigate them, because you'll see that we have information, we have ideas, but we certainly don't have the perfect answer on how to avoid black bear attacks. Of course, one way would be to, live in downtown New York City. The chances are of you being attacked by a black bear pretty remote, right? But that's certainly not something that's going to be an option for most people, and some people would be horrified by the idea of living in New York City. But nevertheless, at the present time, we have no perfect answer for how to avoid attacks. But so we're going to delve into a particular article that's going to talk about reviewing lethal attacks caused by black bears to try to induct principles and concepts that we might be able to keep in the back of our minds on how to protect ourselves if you are living in black bear country. So let me bring that particular slide up. And so there we are. There's my PowerPoint on black bears, and there's a photo of a black bear that I was able to take. So the article that I'm referring to is called Fatal Attacks by American Black Bear on People. Notice the dates there, 1900 to 2009, and that was published in the Journal of Wildlife Management Volume 75, Issue 3, pages 596 to 603. So let me repeat that again for those of you who didn't quite get it if you were writing it down. And of course, those of you driving, please rewind it at a future time when you're able to do it safely. So it's Fatal Attacks by American Black Bear on People, 1900 to 2009, Journal of Wildlife Management, Volume 75, Issue 3, pages 596 to 603. And it was written by Stephen Herrero, Andrew Higgins, James E. Cardoza, Laura I. Hajduk, and Tom S. Smith. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing Laura's names correctly, but it's Hajduk for Laura's name there. And what they did was they basically surveyed all the reports of fatal bear attacks that they could, of course, encounter, and they tried to categorize them based on how they were published to see if they could find a heuristic or a rubric by which to understand these attacks. And, of course, they were only focusing on fatal attacks. Next time, we'll talk about the non-fatal attacks, right? So, but this is going to focus on the fatal attacks. And what the rubric they created is they said that there are basically types of behaviors that black bears exhibit. And so they had to have some definitions in order to categorize black bear behavior. And one of them is what they called defensive behavior, right? So defensive behavior was defined as the human entered the bear's overt reaction distance, right? So all animals have a reaction distance. Reaction distance is the place where an animal begins to either flee from you or become threatened by, because it becomes threatened by you, it has some sort of reaction. It's the place where how close can you get to a bird, for example, before it flies away. That's the bear's reaction distance. So if it could be 3 yards, it could be 10 yards, it could be 2 feet. It all depends, right? So, but that is what's called the reaction distance. And so if a bear is reacting when we initiate contact, then there's 2 options for the bear at that point. The bear could flee, run away, or the bear could go into threatening posture and threaten the intruder, which would of course be us. And in those situations, when the bear swats the ground with the front paws, it has what's called short or bluff charges. Clacking of teeth is where they smack their teeth together, letting you know that they're irritated. They can huff and growl, so these are sort of vocalizations that they can create. And then rarely will there be a physical attack if given space. In other words, if you surprise a bear and you're within 2 feet of it, that's a whole different story than if you are surprising a bear and there's 50 yards between you, right? So ultimately this is how they defined black bear defensive behavior, all right? Because not all attacks by black bears are the same. Fatal attacks were defined as mostly predatory. You say, what's a predatory attack? Well, a predatory attack is when the bear is not giving any audible display of a defensive threat behavior. So remember, a defensive threat is when the bear is trying to tell you, hey, you are making me upset, you're getting me annoyed, I'm not feeling safe here, and I may attack. But a predatory attack, the bear attacks us without any warning. And there's no physical display of defensive threat behavior. Because remember, there's bluff charges, there's clacking of teeth. The bear just simply attacks. And the belief is that the bear is simply seeing us as a prey item, right? If you're trying to treat humans as a prey item, why would you want to warn the human that you're trying to attack? And so this is what they would call a predatory attack behavior. So understand, a black bear can have defensive behavior and predatory behavior, right? And so what they found was most fatal attacks are what they called predatory attacks. That's where the bear was treating the human as if it was a prey item. Now, there were fatal events where the bear was acting, as they defined it, in a defensive posture, right? But the majority of the attacks, as they were looking through the evidence, they defined as actually predatory attacks. So what are some elements of these predatory attacks? The bear was stalking the person, right? The bear came out with a full-on attack with jaws, paws, and teeth. Bear was actually consuming the person. The bear dragged the person because bears have a tendency to cache food, and so if the human is treated as food, it's understandable that they would cache the food. Usually they would drag it to a new area and then they would cover it with some debris. These bears that had predatory attacks would guard the carcass, right? So if it's something you're trying to kill as a feeding item, then the bear would want to not have other animals feed on the food that it's captured. And then, of course, burial of the body, that food caching I was telling you about. So kind of scary stuff, right? So interesting. Let's look at some of these this classification rubric, right? So a predatory attack is the bear is searching, following, attacking, killing. And its vocal stress behaviors are absent because it's not stressed. It's seeing you as a prey item. On occasion, there's going to be dragging of the body, burying of the body, and the feeding on the carcass. Now, within that rubric of predation, they have classified what elements are there of the predation. So they have what's called attempted predation. That's where the bear was acting in a predatory way but failed to kill. A predatory attack is when there was predation or attempted predation, right? They're trying to define their terms here. What's a predatory attack? Well, it's when a bear is acting, either it accomplished predation or it tried to do predation. Then they define the areas where these attacks occurred. In other words, they're looking to try to see if bears attack people in certain habitats more than others. And so they have what's called a front country location. Those are locations within 2 kilometers of travel roads. And if you're trying to kind of do the math, think of 2 kilometers as about a mile, okay? Then you have backcountry locations, and those are locations greater than to a mile of traveled roads. And then they were asking, was there food associated? Now, many of you are probably aware of, use a bear bag where you hang it between trees, high, 6 or 7 feet off the ground or whatever. It might be higher, might be 10, to kind of keep a bear from getting at the food, or making sure that your food is secured inside of a bear-proof container, making sure you don't bring food into your tent. So they're asking the question, what were these attacks where there was a fatal encounter between a human and a bear? Were they associated also with food? And did the bear was the bear looking for food, right? Because that kind of puts a different spin on it, right? It's one thing for a bear to attack you as treating you as prey, but it's another thing for a bear to attack you because he's trying to get food and you just may be standing in the way, right? And so that obviously, the scientists are trying to tease out this information. So here's how they calculated their data, right? So they're looking at all the reported black bear fatalities. These are black bear caused human fatalities between the years of 1900 and 2009. So it's a pretty big list, right? And of course, they want to be clear that they're only referring here to non-captive bears. And that certainly makes sense, right? Obviously, if you have a zookeeper or someone who is illicitly having a bear in their backyard chained up and that person gets killed or injured, as tragic as that's going to be, that is not a situation where you're dealing with a wild bear, right? So what they found was that there were 59 incidents of wild bears attacking people. In those incidents, there were 63 fatalities. So obviously, some of those incidences, the bear killed more than one person at that given moment. 49 of those deaths occurred in Canada and Alaska, and 14 occurred in the lower 48. Okay, so when you think about it statistically, that's not a lot of people. Now, of course, they probably missed some. Certainly the record keeping and the reporting was not going to be the same in the earlier part of the century as opposed to later in the 20th century and the early 21st century. But nevertheless, they're trying to make a good faith effort here. They cast a wide net trying to find as much as they could do. So you can see the trends that were occurring, though, and that certainly makes a lot of sense because at the turn of the century, in the 1900s, there weren't a lot of bears, right? They were hunted pretty aggressively. But as time went on, we're noticing a trend line here of more and more fatal encounters with black bears between humans and black bears. And so that trend is continuing both as our population increases and as black bear populations increases and the greater contact that humans are having with natural environments, the hiking craze, people riding bikes and this sort of thing, right? So, but the trend is in the increasing direction. So they also evaluated when these attacks occurred. Like, what time of the year is it more dangerous to walk in the woods at certain times of the year over others? Now, we have to remember these are correlations, not always causations here, right? But anyways, they're just trying to do descriptive statistics here. What does the data reveal, right? And so what they found was that the fatal attacks occurred between April and November, and 85% of the fatal attacks occurred between May and September, with August being the highest month. Now, the question, of course, is that because there's something going on with bears in August, or is it because more people are entering the woods during August, or is there some other variable going on here, right? But nevertheless, certainly there was concern that bears, as they're trying to fatten up for the winter time, that August, September period of time is clearly going to be something where bears are trying to pack on the pounds. And of course, it's also a time when many people begin hiking out, they're taking vacations, and some of these events have occurred. Now, was there a specific time of day when the majority of these fatal attacks occurred? And interestingly, 70% of these attacks, of course, occurred during the day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. All right, so that's typical. People are out hiking, and lo and behold, they encounter bears. But 20%, about 19%, I'm just going to round it up to 20, occurred between in the evening, that's 6 p.m. and midnight, and 12% occurred between midnight and 6 a.m. So clearly, just walking around or being around in the daylight hours between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. is the highest period of time of people being attacked by black bears. Where did these attack locations occur? Well, the research shows backcountry. Remember, that's more than a mile from a well-traveled road. So 61% of these fatal attacks occurred in areas deeper in the woods as opposed to close away from the woods, more that sort of hinterland between urban and rural interface, right? It'd be within a mile of the road. How long did these attacks occur? In other words, when the human and bear were having their encounter, how long were these attacks occurring? Well, it turns out that it was 87% of them took longer than 10 minutes, out to several hours, where only one incident occurred less than 2 minutes. So you can tell when these attacks occur, 10 minutes is when you're being attacked by a bear. That's going to feel like an eternity, of course, right? So you're not just going to go, I'm just going to get killed real quick. It doesn't sound like that's the case, right? So you're not dying quickly here. Now, what's the number of victims that occurred? Now, obviously, the vast majority of people who are victims of black bear attacks are just single individuals, right? 69% of all the attacks were just one person. But there were 3 incidents where 2 to 3 people were killed by the same bear within several hours of each other. So it's like a bear attacked one person and then went out and found another person, right? One bear killed one person and attempted to kill another person several days later, which is kind of interesting. So obviously we're dealing with a bear who I guess likes the taste of humans, right? And so this is certainly going to be a problem where that bear is targeting people. There was no evidence during that over 100-year time span where they found any instance where bears were acting together in an attack. So it was always a lone bear on every single encounter. And what was another interesting statistic that they had is pepper spray was not used in any fatal attack. Now, I want to put a little caveat on that. When I was in Canada, up around the area of Banff, there were 2 people killed outside of Banff by, I'm not sure what the species of bear was. It might have been a grizzly. I don't remember, but there was bear spray involved there. But again, we're only talking here about black bears, not grizzlies. So I'd have to kind of do a little search on that. And so there may be additional data, of course, that occurred since 2009, right? But nevertheless, for that period of time, bear spray. So the implication here is that bear spray does help reduce the risk of a fatal attack, right? That's kind of the implied implication here, but there's no proof of that, right? Now, when they classified the attacks, remember we have defensive bear attacks and we have predatory bear attacks. According to these researchers, they identified 88% of these attacks as predatory. And 92% of the 88% were done by adult and subadult male bears. And none were done by adult or subadult females. So predatory attacks occur by male bears. So it seems there's something about male bears that has a lot more threat to us as humans. Now, sometimes people will say, well, was the bear sick? Obviously, a bear that is sick and not able to get enough nutrition may see humans as an easier prey source. 68% of the bears that were encountered, that they have reports of, they were reported as being healthy, well-fed bears. Rabies, interestingly enough, was never identified as a possible cause of these attacking behaviors. So that's another interesting element there. Now, was food involved or an associated element of why these bears were attacked? In other words, was the human-bear encounter sort of stimulated by food as opposed to just being the bear wanted to eat us, right? And what they found was food was a factor in 38% of the attacks. And in no incidents was a bear attacking a human, defending a carcass, or attempting to claim a carcass, like, let's say, an elk or a deer that a hunter took or something, which is rather interesting. One fatality occurred where a bear attacked a hunter that wounded it, right? So we need to make sure that this is probably some of that defensive posture, right? Where a bear is, if a hunter went out for a bear and shot the bear and didn't kill it, and the bear charged and killed the hunter, the bear, we would just simply say that means terrible tragedy. That shouldn't have happened to the hunter, of course. But nevertheless, it does put a different spin on it, that bear wasn't hunting people, right? And the bear was reacting to a threat to itself. I mean, we need to recognize that bears are predators, right? They're not predators of people, as a general rule, but if you attack it, it may turn and defend itself, right? 2 incidents occurred, in other words, 2 mortalities occurred where a bear was wounded while entering into a home and the homeowner wounded it. So 3 fatalities occurred where the bear was either shot at by a hunter or where the bear was breaking into a structure and the homeowner shot the bear, only wounded the bear, and the bear ultimately killed the occupant of the home. So it does put a different spin on some of these mortalities, right? So clearly, but it's the predatory attacks that should concern us the most. Now, what were people doing when they were ultimately killed by these bears? And so they have some definitions here about what the humans were doing. 8 people died from occupational activities, right? And they defined occupational activities as, geographical exploration, someone doing forestry work, working on a drill rig, or trapping. That was 8 people. Camping, another 10 people died while they were camping, and that can be backcountry camping or front country camping. Someone in their home site, in other words, they're just living around their home and got killed by a bear. 8 people were involved in hiking activities. 20 people were involved with other activities, and that was defined as the people who were playing, fishing, some people were just sitting, one person was hunting, people were filming, jogging, horse riding, berry picking, biking, picking wild plums, and then of course one person was feeding a bear. 9 of the fatal attacks are unknown. No one knows. They don't have enough data to make a determination. So again, you have a total of 63 deaths that occurred between 1900 and 2009, and you see some classifications there. So what do we do with this information? Can we sort of summarize some of it and try to get some principles to develop from it? Well, interestingly, the size of the person was not associated with attack risk. So whether you weigh 300 pounds or 120 pounds, that doesn't seem to make you less likely to be killed or more likely to be killed. So that you'll take that as good news or bad news depending on your size, right? There was no specific behavior identified with bear attacks except possibly food handling. And again, 38% of the time, food was associated with the bear attack, but problem is there's just not enough statistical data here to get some good numbers from it. So be cautious with food, right? Bears need to pack on a lot of pounds, so why don't we just err on the side of caution there, right? So that's certainly going to be, it's not going to be wrong not to have food around, okay? Or to make sure you're careful with your use of food. Aggression, they found, did dissuade some predatory attacks. In other words, if the person fought and was demonstrating, rather than a hiding posture, a more aggressive posture toward the bear, it seemed to get the bears scared away. And they wanted people to recognize that 30% of the time, bears were attacking people. There were health issues with the bear associated with those attacks. So remember, you had about 38% of the time bears were coming for food. 30% of the time bears had their own health issues involved, right? So that's just part of the mix there. So I wish we had better information, right, in terms of how do we protect ourselves from bears. Well, but hopefully this helps you think about scenarios that you may be putting yourself in and recognizing that some of these bear attacks are caused by bears who just want to hunt people, right? And so that means you need to be paying attention. You need to be keeping aware. And the next podcast I do, we're going to talk about bear attacks where there wasn't a fatality. So this particular publication only dealt with attacks where the bear killed someone. The next publication will be dealing with attacks where the person was not killed, okay? And try to glean some information out, and maybe we can get some bigger, well-formed aspect. But you can see there's chaotic, and we may never get to a place where we can say, do this and do this and do this and you'll be safe, because animals have a mind of their own, right? And so all we can try to do is improve our odds. So when you're out in the woods and you're out carrying along, try to keep an awareness of what you're doing, that there are predators out there that you may need to think about. So hopefully you'll find that, if not thought-provoking, helpful for you, and maybe think about people that you've talked to may have had bear encounters, and try to think about how you can help clients who may be living in bear country. They may be asking you for help. on how to maybe respond to some of these particular cases. And so this will give you some ideas along that line. Well, I'm Stephen Vantassel. You've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Hope you enjoyed the show. And if you're wondering again what we're all about, well, Living the Wildlife is all about providing research-based information to help people resolve human-wildlife conflicts in responsible ways. And so that's what we do here. We provide that technical information. This week we delved with bear attacks on people that resulted in the fatality of the humans. So we go into some really deep dive, kind of arcane areas, but this is what it means to be a true professional within the wildlife control space. And so hopefully you've enjoyed that, because black bears are over a significant portion of the United States, and chances are you're going to have an encounter with one, especially if you're not in a major metropolitan area, if you're out in the more suburban or rural interface space. Would love to hear from you. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you if you have thoughts about the shows. Perhaps you have questions that you'd like to send off. Definitely reach out to me. And again, do visit my website. There's additional information and resources there available for you. And do subscribe to the channel. We'd love to have you subscribe, ring the bell, and provide a review and comment about the podcast. We'd love to have that kind of support from you. And those of you who don't want to deal with YouTube, you can definitely get me on Rumble. Of course, just look up Wildlife Control Consultant. You can get me there. Well, again, this is Living the Wildlife. Why do we call it Living the Wildlife? Well, because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.